Linda Carpenter thought love had finally found her at 62, but when she flew across the country to meet her 23-year-old online boyfriend, what waited in that motel room wasn't romance. It was death. Helen Morris had always been cautious with her heart. At 62, she had built her life around routines that made her feel safe. Morning coffee by the window, a walk through her quiet Florida neighborhood, then long evenings spent scrolling through social media. The silence in her house was heavy since her husband passed away 2 years earlier. The television murmured in the background, but it couldn't replace a real voice, a real presence. One night, in a moment of loneliness, Helen joined an online group for people who love to travel. It was harmless, she told herself, just conversation. But that night, a message popped up from someone named Ethan23, and everything started to change. Ethan claimed to be a 23-year-old photographer from Ohio. His profile was filled with breathtaking landscapes and pictures of himself standing by waterfalls and cliffs. He seemed full of life and adventure, everything Helen felt she had lost. He told her he admired her optimism, that her comments about nature reminded him of his mother who had died young. The kindness in his messages felt genuine. For the first time in years, Helen felt noticed. They began talking every day. Her mornings started with his good morning texts, and her nights ended with his photos of the sunset. He seemed to understand her, to listen in a way no one had in a long time. Weeks passed, and Ethan's attention became the center of her world. Her friends teased her when she mentioned him, calling it puppy love, but Helen didn't care. She began wearing perfume again, changing her hairstyle, and even buying new clothes. It felt like life had given her a second chance at happiness. He talked about dreams of traveling together, of showing her the hidden corners of the world he loved to photograph. Helen imagined it vividly, the two of them standing on a beach at dusk, the sound of waves and the feeling of youth returning to her heart. Then one evening, Ethan told her something that made her heart ache. He said his camera equipment had been stolen after a trip. His insurance had lapsed, and now he couldn't work. He didn't ask for money, but Helen felt his disappointment through the screen. She told herself it wasn't wrong to help someone she cared about. The next day, she wired him $2,000. He was grateful but modest, saying he'd pay her back once he rebuilt his business. That night, Helen slept peacefully for the first time in months, proud of her kindness. Over the next few weeks, Ethan started talking about meeting in person. He said he wanted to show her his world, to finally take a real photo of her instead of just seeing her through a camera screen. The thought of it thrilled her. But when she suggested visiting him, he hesitated. He claimed his work kept him too busy, that traveling would be expensive. Helen didn't want him to struggle, so she made the decision herself. She sold her husband's old gold watch, a keepsake she had never planned to part with, and booked a flight to Ohio. She imagined his surprise, his joy at seeing her walk through the airport toward him. As the flight approached, Helen's excitement grew, but so did her nervousness. The night before departure, she sent Ethan a message telling him her flight details and the time she'd arrive. Hours passed with no reply. She checked her phone again and again, but the message remained unread. She tried to convince herself he was just busy, maybe sleeping. The next morning, she packed her bag carefully, a new dress, her favorite earrings, a book for the plane. As she locked her front door, she felt a strange chill run down her spine like a quiet warning. She ignored it and drove to the airport. The plane ride was long, but her imagination kept her company. She pictured Ethan waiting by the arrival's gate, holding flowers, smiling the way he always did in his photos. But when she landed, there was no one waiting. Her phone showed no new messages. She called him several times, but each call went straight to voicemail. Still, she refused to let doubt ruin her moment. She rented a small silver car and drove to the address he had once mentioned. A quiet residential street surrounded by leafless trees. The house looked nothing like she expected. It was small, with peeling paint and broken blinds. The mailbox was full, and the front yard was overgrown. She knocked several times, calling his name softly, but there was no sound from inside. A man sitting on a porch across the street stared at her as she waited. His expression was unreadable. She smiled politely, but he didn't respond. Uneasy, Helen returned to her car and sat behind the wheel for several minutes. She wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe Ethan had given her the wrong address. Maybe he'd been delayed. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, she decided to check into a nearby motel and try again the next day. The motel was small and quiet, its neon sign flickering in the dark. Helen sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone. Still nothing. Then, just before midnight, her phone buzzed. A message appeared from Ethan's account. Her heart leapt as she opened it, expecting an apology or an explanation. But instead it contained only 4 chilling words. "Go back home, Helen." She froze, staring at the screen. The warmth and affection that had filled his messages were gone, replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. Her hands trembled as she reread the message again and again, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it wasn't from him. Maybe someone had hacked his account. She wanted to believe that, but a dark feeling began to settle inside her chest. A quiet, creeping fear that something about Ethan had never been real. As the lights from passing cars flickered across the thin motel curtains, Helen sat in silence, clutching her phone. The dream she had built over months began to unravel in her mind. Somewhere out there, she thought, the man she had trusted might be watching her right now. And for the first time, she wished she had never come. Helen barely slept that night. Every sound outside the motel made her flinch. The hum of cars on the distant highway, the wind rattling the window, it all felt amplified, heavier, almost deliberate. The 4 words from Ethan's message kept circling in her mind like a whisper she couldn't escape. She told herself she would leave in the morning, drive straight back to the airport, and forget everything. But when dawn came, she couldn't do it. She needed answers. She needed to see him, to look into his eyes and understand why everything had changed so suddenly. Maybe he was in trouble. Maybe someone had forced him to send that message. She left the motel just after sunrise, the air still damp with dew. The street where Ethan was supposed to live looked even emptier in daylight. The house seemed lifeless, the kind of place no one had lived in for months. A plastic chair lay on its side in the yard, and the mailbox overflowed with unopened letters. Helen knocked again, this time harder. Still nothing. She noticed a curtain twitch slightly in the window of the house across the street. The same man from the porch was watching her again. She waved, hoping for some acknowledgement, but he turned away and disappeared inside. Helen decided to ask around. She drove to a small grocery store down the street and showed the cashier a photo of Ethan she had saved on her phone. The young woman behind the counter squinted at it, then shook her head. "Doesn't look familiar," she said. Helen's heart sank. But as she turned to leave, a man standing near the magazine rack spoke up. He was older, with a weathered face and tired eyes. He told her he thought he'd seen someone like that near the old trailer park by the river. Helen thanked him and drove off, clinging to that small thread of hope. The trailer park sat beyond the edge of town, surrounded by half-dead trees and muddy roads. The ground was littered with old cans and rusted bicycles. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and smoke. Helen parked her car near the entrance and walked slowly between the rows of faded trailers. Some had curtains drawn tight, others were abandoned entirely. She felt out of place, but her determination pushed her forward. After a few minutes, she saw a young man sitting outside a trailer, who'd pulled low over his face, a cigarette burning between his fingers. He looked up when she approached, his expression unreadable. Helen's heart pounded as she studied him. His hair was darker than in the photos, his build leaner, but there was something about the shape of his mouth, the way he tilted his head. It was Ethan, or at least it looked like him. Before she could speak, another man appeared behind the trailer, holding a camera. The flash went off, bright and sudden. Startled, Helen stepped back, shielding her eyes. When her vision cleared, both men were gone. She ran to the trailer and knocked on the door, calling out for Ethan. No one answered. Through the dusty window, she could see a cluttered table with tangled phone chargers, cameras, and laptops. On one of the screens, she recognized her own Facebook profile photo. Panic surged through her chest. She stumbled back toward her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her keys. It wasn't love anymore. It was something darker, something that felt like a trap. At the police station, the officer at the front desk listened patiently but didn't seem convinced. He asked if Helen had proof that a crime had been committed. When she described the photos, the online messages, and the trailer filled with electronics, he told her it sounded like a scam operation, not an emergency. He took down her report but didn't promise much. Helen left feeling helpless. She sat in her car in the parking lot, staring at her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked older than she remembered, worn and foolish. When she returned to the motel that evening, her room felt colder. The lights flickered briefly as she closed the door. She tried to calm herself by watching television, but her mind refused to settle. Her phone was silent, no messages from Ethan, no updates from the police. Then, just as she began to doze off, the screen lit up. Another message appeared from his account. "You shouldn't have gone there." Her heart nearly stopped. She looked around the room as if someone might be inside. The message confirmed her worst fear: someone was watching her. She checked the window, pulling the curtains tight, but couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on her. She thought of the man with the camera, the one who had taken her picture earlier. Maybe it hadn't been random. Maybe they had been following her since she arrived. She turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening. Hours passed, the silence stretching endlessly. Then, faintly, she heard footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate steps stopping right by her door. She held her breath, too afraid to move. A shadow appeared beneath the crack of light under the door, lingering for several seconds before finally fading away. Helen waited until sunrise before opening the door. The parking lot was empty except for her car. She looked down and noticed something on the ground, a single white envelope taped to the doorframe. Her name was written on it in block letters. Inside was a photograph of her standing outside Ethan's supposed house the day before. The picture had been taken from across the street, probably from that porch where the neighbor had been watching her. She felt sick. It wasn't just a scam anymore. Someone knew who she was, where she was staying, and everything she'd done since arriving. She packed her bag in a hurry and decided to leave town. But as she reached her car, she saw that all 4 tires had been slashed. The motel manager came out to see what was happening and offered to call a tow truck. Helen nodded weakly, unable to explain the terror twisting inside her. She tried to use her phone, but it displayed no service. She walked to the office to use their landline, only to find it dead too. The manager muttered something about a storm the night before disrupting the lines. Helen didn't believe it. She returned to her room, locked the door, and sat by the window. The same black car that had driven past twice earlier now parked across the street. 2 figures sat inside. They didn't move. They just watched. Helen pulled the curtains shut and sank onto the bed. She had traveled hundreds of miles chasing love, but now she realized she was trapped in something far more dangerous than heartbreak. The man she thought she knew didn't exist, and whoever was behind his mask was too close. The message's warning echoed again in her mind. Maybe she really should have gone home. But now it felt like leaving might no longer be an option. Helen woke up to the sound of voices outside her motel door. They were low and muffled, but she could tell there were 2 men talking. She froze in bed, afraid to even breathe. The sound of footsteps moved closer, then stopped. A moment later, she heard the faint metallic click of a car door shutting. When she finally gathered the courage to peek through the curtain, the black car that had been watching her was gone. Her hands trembled as she packed what little she had left: a purse, a few clothes, and the burned photograph she had found earlier. She knew she couldn't stay another night. When she stepped outside, her heart sank. Her car tires were not only slashed, but the windows were now cracked. Someone had been there during the night. The motel manager came running when he saw the damage. He looked genuinely concerned this time, promising to review the security footage. An hour later, he returned looking uneasy. The video showed 2 men walking toward her room just after midnight, faces hidden under hoodies. They carried something in their hands, tools, maybe knives. The image quality was poor, and their license plate couldn't be read. The police were called again, but by the time they arrived, the men were long gone. Helen explained everything she knew, every message, every strange detail. The officer took notes but repeated the same words as before. It might be an online scam gone too far. They promised to patrol the area, but didn't he seem to grasp the danger she felt closing in? She realized she couldn't rely on anyone else. If she wanted to survive, she had to find her own way out. She asked the motel to help her rent a different car since hers was unusable. By late afternoon, a small blue sedan was delivered to her. She decided to drive back to the trailer park, hoping to take pictures of the site and collect proof. She felt foolish doing it alone, but desperation gave her courage. The sky was gray as she approached the area, clouds heavy with rain. When she turned the corner, her heart stopped. The trailer was gone. Only a patch of flattened grass and tire marks remained. It looked as though it had been hauled away overnight. Helen searched the area, kicking through piles of debris left behind. Among the scattered trash, she found a broken camera lens, a burned notebook, and a torn photograph. She picked up the photo carefully. It showed several women older, smiling, posing in different places. Some faces were crossed out with thick black ink. Others had small numbers written beneath them. Helen felt a wave of nausea. One of the uncrossed faces looked familiar. It was her. She clutched the photo tightly and drove back to town, her mind spinning. She didn't stop until she reached the police station again, bursting inside with the picture in her hand. The officer on duty studied it for a long time before shaking his head. Without evidence of violence, he said, there wasn't much they could do. He promised to look into it, but Helen could tell he didn't believe her. She left the station trembling, feeling invisible, as if she were already fading out of the world. When she returned to the motel, the door to her room was open. Panic surged through her. She ran inside, only to find her suitcase missing. Her clothes, her wallet, her laptop, everything was gone. The bed had been stripped, and the curtains were torn down. She rushed to the front desk, demanding answers. The receptionist looked confused and said a young man had come earlier claiming to be her nephew. He had shown an ID with her last name and said she'd asked him to collect her things because she'd been taken to the hospital. Helen's legs nearly gave out. She begged to see the security footage, but the receptionist said the cameras were being repaired that day. She knew it wasn't a coincidence. Someone had planned this. Whoever was behind it was watching her every move, always one step ahead. She decided to leave the motel immediately, even without her belongings. She took the blue sedan and drove toward the edge of town, following signs that led to the highway. Rain began to fall, heavy and relentless, turning the road slick. Every time she checked the rearview mirror, headlights appeared far behind her, sometimes close, sometimes fading back. She couldn't tell if it was paranoia or if someone was actually following. After nearly an hour of driving, she pulled into a rest stop to catch her breath. The parking lot was empty except for a single truck parked in the corner. She locked her doors and leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she saw something taped to her windshield, a piece of paper fluttering in the rain. She stepped out carefully, heart pounding, and peeled it off. It was another photo of her, this time taken from behind as she stood at the police station earlier that day. Scrawled across it in black ink were the words, "Stop looking." She dropped the paper, climbed back into the car, and locked the doors. Her breathing came fast and shallow. Whoever they weren't just watching, they were everywhere. Every place she went, they had already been. Every move she made, they knew. Helen sat in silence for a long time, rain hammering against the roof. She thought of going to the airport, but fear stopped her. What if they were waiting there too? She decided to drive to the next town, anywhere farther away from the motel and the trailer park. She didn't know where she was heading, only that she couldn't stay still. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, dark and empty. She drove through the storm until exhaustion blurred her vision. Finally, she pulled over near an old diner with a flickering neon sign. The lights were still on inside, but no customers remained. She parked at the far end of the lot, trying to rest her eyes. The sound of thunder rolled over the hills. When she woke up, the sky was still dark, but something felt different. Her phone, which had been dead earlier, now buzzed on the seat beside her. A message appeared. It wasn't from Ethan this time, it was from an unknown number. It contained only a single image, the burned photograph she had found near the trailer, but now with her face crossed out in thick black ink. Helen stared at the screen, her chest tightening. She looked around the parking lot, half expecting someone to step out of the shadows, but there was no one. Only the hum of the rain and the empty road stretching into darkness. She didn't know if she was being hunted for what she'd discovered or if she was already marked for something worse. All she knew was that she couldn't go back, not to the motel, not to the police, not anywhere near the name Ethan again. She started the car and drove off into the night, unaware that the black car from before had pulled out of the shadows behind her, following at a distance, its headlights dim and patient. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky remained a dull gray that made everything look lifeless. Helen drove for hours without knowing where she was going. Her eyes were heavy, her mind scattered, and the world outside her windshield blurred into streaks of color. Every passing car made her tense. Every reflection in the glass made her think someone was behind her. By the time she saw a gas station on the side of the highway, she was running on fear and fumes. She pulled in, parked by the pumps, and sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel tightly. She told herself she needed to think rationally, to breathe, to plan her next move. But logic was slipping away from her, replaced by the cold realization that whoever was after her knew everything she did before she did it. She went inside the gas station, hoping to use the phone, but the payphone near the door was broken. She tried to buy a new SIM card for her phone, but the clerk said they didn't sell them there. He looked at her with suspicion, like she was another tired stranger lost on the road. Helen left quickly, not wanting to draw attention. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a small bulletin board near the door covered in missing persons flyers. One of them showed a gray-haired woman named Martha Jennings. The picture was grainy, but Helen froze as soon as she saw it. The woman in the photo was one of the faces from the burned photograph she had found at the trailer park. Her pulse quickened. She stepped closer to confirm, reading that Martha had disappeared 6 months ago after traveling to meet a man she'd met online. Helen backed away from the board, her stomach twisting. It wasn't a coincidence. The women in that burned picture weren't random, they were victims. Victims of the same people who had lured her here. Maybe some had never made it home. The thought sent a shiver through her body. She rushed to her car, locked the doors, and tried to steady her breathing. She needed to find help, someone who would actually listen. She drove to the nearest library she could find, figuring it was a public place with cameras, safe enough to think clearly. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly as she sat down at one of the computers. Her hands shook as she logged into her email. She began searching through old messages from Ethan, looking for clues, names, places, anything that could connect him to something real. What she found instead made her feel sick. There were dozens of similar emails in her inbox, sent by different accounts but all using the same writing style. Each one started the same way, friendly, charming, affectionate. They all mentioned photography, travel, and loneliness. Different names, same story. She realized Ethan wasn't a person at all. He was a mask, a rotating identity used by whoever was behind the operation. Helen created a new folder and saved everything. Then she searched for the photos Ethan had sent her, the ones of himself near beaches and mountains. She dragged one into an image search tool and waited. The result appeared within seconds. The same photo, same smile, but different name taken from a social media account belonging to someone else entirely. A real young man from Canada who had no idea his image was being used to lure strangers. Every picture Ethan had ever sent her was stolen. Every word had been fabricated. She wasn't in love with a man, she was being hunted by a network that had perfected the art of deception. She felt lightheaded, but she knew what she had to do. She downloaded every message, every image, every fake name, and transferred them to a flash drive. She attached it to an email addressed to her sister in Florida, writing only a short message. "If something happens to me, give this to the police." Her hands hesitated before pressing send, but she did it anyway. It was the only thing that gave her a small sense of control. When she looked up from the screen, her heart skipped. Through the glass front of the library, parked across the street, was the same black car. Its headlights were off this time, but she recognized it instantly. Two figures sat inside, still and silent. Helen's throat went dry. She stood quickly, shoved the flash drive into her pocket, and left through the back exit. The cold air hit her face as she stepped into the alley behind the building. She walked fast, not daring to look back. Her footsteps splashed through puddles as she moved deeper into the maze of back streets. The sound of a car engine starting made her stop. She turned the corner and ducked behind a dumpster, crouching low. The car rolled past slowly, tires crunching over gravel. She could see one of the men in the driver's seat now, young, clean-cut, with a hood pulled tight. The passenger held something, a camera, pointed out the window. They were still documenting her, every move, every place. Helen stayed still until the car disappeared down the street. Then she ran. She didn't stop until she reached a small diner off the main road. It was nearly empty except for a waitress cleaning tables. Helen asked to use the phone, claiming her car had broken down. The waitress nodded and handed her the receiver. Helen dialed the police again, her voice trembling as she explained everything she had discovered. This time, her story was too detailed to ignore. The officer on the other end told her to stay where she was and that someone would be dispatched immediately. She waited by the window, watching the road. Every minute felt like an hour. The black car never reappeared, but she couldn't shake the feeling it was still nearby. After what felt like forever, 2 officers finally arrived. They took her statement carefully this time. When she showed them the burned photograph and told them about the missing women, their expressions changed. They promised to investigate the trailer park and any addresses connected to Ethan's online accounts. Helen handed over copies of the evidence from her flash drive. That night, the police raided the area near the river where the trailer had been. What they found shocked everyone. Hidden in a nearby storage unit were multiple computers, fake IDs, cash, and photographs of several older women, some still missing. There were also security cameras connected to a live feed showing motel parking lots, diners, and rest stops in different states. The operation had been much larger than anyone expected. Helen spent the night at the police station, too shaken to sleep. When dawn came, she looked out the window and saw the first light in days. She thought of all the women in those photographs, women who had believed the same sweet words she once had. She felt both lucky and haunted. The officers told her they would continue the investigation and that arrests were likely soon. Helen nodded but didn't feel comforted. She knew something about people like this. They didn't just stop. They didn't forgive those who escaped. She thanked the officers and asked to be taken to the airport. As the patrol car drove her away, she saw the black car one last time, parked far down the street, engine running, its windows too dark to see through. It didn't follow her. But somehow, Helen knew it wasn't over. When the police finally arrived at the motel, the sun had already started to rise over the small town, turning the sky into a dull orange haze. The parking lot was quiet except for a single car parked at the far end, its windows slightly fogged. Inside, the officers discovered the lifeless body of Linda Carpenter, a 62-year-old woman who had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to meet her online lover. She was lying on the bed, her phone still clutched in her hand, as if she had been trying to make one last call. The room was disturbingly clean, too clean. Her purse was missing, along with her laptop and wallet. The only thing left behind was a half-empty coffee cup and a motel receipt showing she had checked in the night. Before, with a man named Jason Reed, investigators immediately began piecing together the final hours of Linda's life. Surveillance footage from the motel's front desk showed her arriving with Jason around 7 p.m. He appeared calm, smiling, even carrying her suitcase for her. The two walked arm in arm to the room and were never seen leaving together again. Just before midnight, a shadowy figure matching Jason's build was seen walking out alone, wearing a dark hoodie and carrying a large duffel bag. The car Linda had rented remained in the parking lot, untouched. What baffled investigators was that Jason Reed didn't exist. His name was fake, and the ID he used at check-in turned out to be stolen. The digital trail became the key to unraveling the truth. Linda's phone revealed hundreds of messages exchanged with the young man she believed was Jason. He had first contacted her through an online writing forum, where they bonded over poetry and their love of travel. Over months, their conversations grew more personal, and he began to share intimate details about his supposed life, his struggles, his ambitions, his loneliness. He told her he felt seen for the first time in his life, and Linda, who had spent years feeling invisible after retirement, believed she had finally found someone who understood her. As investigators dug deeper, They discovered that the man she knew as Jason was actually someone else entirely, a 26-year-old drifter named Cole Myers, who had a history of online scams and identity theft. Cole had previously posed as different people to extract money or favors from older women, but this time things had gone far beyond fraud. In the weeks leading up to Linda's death, she had wired him nearly $25,000 under the belief that he was starting a business and would soon repay her. When she told him she was planning to visit him in person, his tone changed drastically. Still, she insisted on going. What nobody knew was that Cole was already being watched by authorities for a separate case involving another missing woman in a nearby state. He had met that woman under similar circumstances, but her body had never been found. When investigators compared the timelines, the pattern was undeniable. Cole would charm his victims online, gain their trust, convince them to travel or send money, and then disappear. Only this time, he hadn't been careful enough to cover his tracks. Inside the motel room, forensic teams found faint traces of blood on the bathroom floor, later confirmed to be Linda's. A single fingerprint on the light switch matched Cole Myers. From there, the manhunt began. Police tracked his last known location to a bus station just hours after Linda's estimated time of death. Witnesses remembered him buying a one-way ticket to New Orleans and discarding a duffel bag in a trash bin outside. When the bag was recovered, it contained Linda's jewelry, her missing wallet, and the burner phone Cole had used to communicate with her. The story spread quickly across the country. News stations covered it for weeks, warning people about the dangers of online relationships and catfishing schemes. But for Linda's family, the news offered little comfort. Her daughter Megan couldn't understand how her mother, a cautious, intelligent woman, had fallen into such a trap. What haunted her most was the thought that Linda had died believing she was loved. Months passed with no sign of Cole until an anonymous tip led police to a small coastal town in Louisiana. He had been living under another false identity, working at a dockyard, and keeping a low profile. When officers finally caught up with him, he tried to flee into the nearby marshes but was quickly surrounded. In his possession were several fake IDs, a stack of prepaid credit cards, and Linda's gold bracelet. During questioning, Cole refused to speak. He sat silently, staring at the floor as detectives showed him the evidence. The case against him was overwhelming digital messages, fingerprints, surveillance footage, and stolen property. Still, he showed no emotion, as if he didn't care about what he had done. Later, during a search of his storage unit, police discovered a laptop containing conversations with multiple women, all older and all vulnerable. He had saved their photos, letters, and personal details, cataloging them like trophies. When the trial began, the courtroom was filled with people who had followed the case since the beginning. The prosecution described Cole as a manipulative predator who targeted lonely women for money and control. They presented the timeline of Linda's final hours, showing how every move he made had been carefully planned. The defense tried to argue that Linda's death was accidental, that she had fallen during an argument, but the evidence painted a darker picture. The bruises on her neck, the cleaned bathroom, the missing valuables, it all pointed to murder. After 2 weeks, the jury returned their verdict, guilty on all counts. Cole Myers was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, he finally spoke one chilling sentence that no one could forget. He said that Linda wasn't supposed to die that night, that he just wanted her to stop begging him to love her. In the end, Linda's story became more than just another headline. It was a painful reminder of how easily trust can be weaponized in the digital age. She had wanted love, connection, and adventure, but what she found instead was deceit and danger. Her tragic journey sparked nationwide discussions about online safety for older adults and the emotional vulnerability that loneliness can bring. Though justice was served, the scars left behind were permanent, etched into the memories of everyone who had followed her story from the beginning. And in that quiet motel room where it all ended, the echoes of her final hope still lingered, a hope that love, even in its most fragile form, could be real.